Hello there, friends. My name is Rachel, GNS Middle. Gilbert and Sullivan is my middle name, and my middle name is my last name. And I am here today on behalf of Forbear Theatre to explore the magic of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas while very pedantically ranking every element of them. As you can see today, I valiantly try to do some eyeliner, and I'm getting okay at eyeliner. But something happened where this eye went wonky and then I had to do this eye to make it the same as the other eye, but then I did that one too thick and then I went back and forward and now I've ended up with very odd eyeliner. So that's why. But we're just going to live with that for the rest of the video. First of all, before I get into the content of this video, which is exploring the dialogue of the Gondoliers. Now there's something in my eye. What you're going to do is, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, just hit the subscribe button. I know a lot of my followers may not be used to subscribing to channels on YouTube, but it doesn't really affect you in any way whatsoever. You can click the bell, that'll mean that you'll get an alert when I publish a new video. But if you hit subscribe, it doesn't really have any consequence to your life other than making me feel good and letting the algorithm know that people like these videos. So if you do like these videos, please do subscribe and like the video. And also, I would say that if you really like my videos and you want more people to see them, then try and make it your mission this week to get one other person to subscribe to my channel. Just share a video. Say, hey, Susan, I hear you like opera / GNS / autistic people trying to make sense of things I love. Why don't you check out this channel? You might learn a few things and also have a great time because she's fun to watch. So try and do that by next week. This week we are discussing the Gondoliers dialogue. Interestingly enough, there was a Facebook post about this only a couple of days ago. So by the time this video comes out on Saturday, which is in 3 days' time, you guys will probably remember the comment I'm talking about. It was quite an innocuous comment. It was just somebody talking about the Gondoliers. I actually can't remember the exact content of the initial comment, but it got loads of commenters and we were all getting involved and people were talking about how the Gondoliers has plot issues. As soon as the Ducal party enter, it kind of goes downhill, which is the first dialogue scene, and how there's not really a solid narrative, there's not really a solid plot. And you know what, I kind of agree with all of this, really. I don't necessarily think the show starts to go downhill at the first dialogue and continues to go downhill from there. I do think there are highs in the Gondoliers, but they're not really to do with the characters and the plot. I think somebody very helpfully commented at some place in the comment thread, or who watches Gilbert and Sullivan operas for the plots and the characters? I'm like, pretty much everyone I know. It's like, if you're just listening for the music, yeah, that's perfectly valid, but I think most people who like GNS and not kind of other conventional forms of opera are usually here because they find something charming about what GNS do, not just in the music. Because I would say Sullivan's music, while amazing, I don't think is noticeably better than any conventional opera composers. I'm speaking from a place of total ignorance here, and you are very free to tell me that I'm wrong about this, but I would say that the special thing about Gilbert and Sullivan operas is the brilliance of the music, which was very good for the day, combined with an actual playwright who was amazing for writing straight plays completely independently of Sullivan beforehand. And Sullivan was a completely independent composer. So these two people came together and they made these incredible operas, comic operas. There was also somebody commented about how these are not operas. I mean, I suppose in the very pedantic sense, they're not really operas, they're comic operas, but isn't comic opera like a branch of opera? I don't know where you want to draw the line. This is not my thing. I don't really get into all that nitty-gritty definition stuff. So if somebody wants to tell me that Gilbert and Sullivan operas are definitely not operas, that's fine. I don't really have a horse in that race. I'm not going to have a very strong opinion about that. But I can see both sides of that. I can see how they're not conventional operas, but I can also see that maybe opera is the best word to use to describe them. Especially when it comes to something like Gondoliers, where the plot really isn't important, it's more to do with the music. There are several plot threads in the Gondoliers. First of all, we get this idea that Marco and Giuseppe want to find wives, and they find them, and that story's kind of over immediately. That's like a little opera in itself, which is also a comment I made in that thread. But it's lovely. That's a lovely little story. But then we get to see how their married life starts, and their married life starts by somebody saying, oh, one of you was actually a king. But the trouble is, these guys are Republicans, and they hold all kings in detestation. But as soon as they realise that one of them might be a king, they're like, oh, no, we just hate bad kings. And so they both come to rule equally because they don't know which one is which. And then in the meanwhile, there's this lady who is engaged to whichever one is king, but they don't know which one that is yet, but she's in love with somebody else who kind of has an inside view of this whole situation. And then they all go to Barataria to like wait to see what's going to happen, and they have a dance party. And then it's revealed that neither... That's just my scent diffuser going. I'm going to jump every time that happens. But then they realise when they get Louis's mother, who was a nursemaid to whom the king's son was entrusted, she reveals, oh, actually, my son I replaced. So one of her sons is Marco/Giuseppe. And that's never like tied up. We never get to see which one is her son. Maybe she doesn't even know. I mean, he was a baby. How could she know? You know, maybe she would. Is there some ineffable bond between mother and son? Maybe there is. But then we find out that Louis is actually the king, and then him and Casilda live happily ever after, and Marco and Giuseppe can go back to being gondoliers. Can go back to being gondoliers, not gondolas, that they're the boats, so they wouldn't be the boats. Through most of the other operas, there's some kind of like meaning or message there. There's some overarching theme that we can latch onto. So like, I'm not actually sure what the one in Trial by Jury is. That maybe doesn't have one, it's so short. Sorcerer. Class is silly. HMS Pinafore. Class is silly. Love levels or ranks. Pirates of Penzance. To always do one's duty is a little bit absurd and is kind of at odds with sensible morality. Number 4, patience. Don't follow fads, or like this is what happens when people blindly follow fads, especially rich privileged people who don't really understand the fads they're following. Iolanthe is the people's strengths and weaknesses can be very different, and sometimes these strengths and weaknesses will clash in amusing ways. So like the fairies are pretty much all powerful beings who can probably kill the peers without too much trouble, and Strephon is kind of this all powerful person. But then the fairies' weakness is the fact that they love mortals. And so yeah, it's interesting how you can never really be too powerful. Nobody's ultimately powerful. That's kind of the message there. Princess Ida, we won't get into that because I think the message maybe is that women shouldn't try and like be independent. But the thing is, that isn't actually what anyone wants anyway. I'd say maybe a more fitting message from Princess Ida should be something like, you know, we should just be working together as genders and not really be fighting each other as genders. Maybe that's a nice message there. The Mikado, I don't know if there really is like an overarching message in the Mikado. That's actually quite an interesting one, because I would say the Mikado has like a really good story. But yeah, there's not really... Isn't that funny? How I actually think that as being a really good story. I suppose in Mikado it's just so high stakes. Like that's like it's I guess the theme is people being in power that shouldn't be, and that actually power brings on more downsides than upsides, perhaps. Because the Lord High Executioner finds himself in quite a pickle. And lies are not good. And virtuous triumphidonian theatrical performances. And then Ruddigore, I guess, you know, if you tell one lie, i.e. fake your own death and pretend you're not the baronet, you're going to end up having to tell more lies to cover up that lie, and then you end up in a situation where you're having to like defend yourself from loads of ghosts that want to kill you. So I guess the moral of that is, you know, don't lie or don't lie too much. Yeoman, again, like communication. Tell people what your feelings are about them. Like, don't be shy about it. That's probably what I'd say, Yeoman of the Guard is. Or don't make rash decisions. Don't marry somebody until you know for sure you're going to die. Utopia Limited, British, what's the word? Like British practices and colonialism are really stupid and actually very harmful, and can end up harming cultures and eradicating them, which is actually like one of the most powerful messages in it. Grand Duke, yeah, not really much of a message in Grand Duke. That's more of a kind of avant-garde, crazy pantomime. But yeah, so interestingly, Grand Duke and Mikado don't really have like a solid thread, but they're just so crazy and fun that there's a lot going on. Whereas Gondoliers, you never really get the impression of there being any high stakes. There's a lot about republicanism in there, but nothing ever gets decided, because on the one hand, you're seeing the absurd extent of republicanism in that if everyone truly was treated equal, which is not republicanism, that's communism. So, you know, that's a different thing anyway. But we're seeing like the extremes of that. But the thing is, we never actually see why that would be a bad thing, because, yeah, I guess the price of toddy goes down and the price of shoddy goes up, but why is that a problem? Like, probably a socialist world wouldn't have loads of capitalism in it anyway, so why would prices be going up and down? I'm not an economist. I don't know the answer to that. But it doesn't really seem like anyone's really convinced Marco and Giuseppe that republicanism is wrong. And actually we're getting a lot of messages as well about how rich and noble etiquette is a bit stupid. Like in the Gavotte, that's all a bit silly, and the Duke saying, oh no, you have to do this sort of thing and this sort of thing, which are always stupid, arbitrary things. But this never gets resolved because Marco and Giuseppe don't end up being king, so nothing ever happens. It just all seems a bit wet, really. But yeah, with that in mind, you know, I'm going to give you some of the parameters for this. That was a long introduction, but I feel like these things need to be talked about because I like to talk a bit about the story before I get into these rankings. So, as ever, we get a mark out of 10 for beauty/poetry, a mark out of 10 for character, and a mark out of 10 for narrative importance. This time, however, I've given a mark out of 20 for comedy because I think that comedy is one of the main things that Gondoliers' dialogue has to latch onto, and so I'm specifically weighting that highly because I know that there aren't really any scenes that shine, I think, in any of the other categories. So I think comedy is going to be the one that decides kind of which scenes are going to win and which ones aren't going to do so well. So let's crack on. At last we have arrived at our destination. This is the Ducal Palace, and it is here that the Grand Inquisitor resides. As a Castilian hidalgo of 95 quarterings, I regret that I am unable to pay my state visit on a horse. As a Castilian hidalgo of that description, I should have preferred to ride through the streets of Venice, but owing, I presume, to an unusually wet season, the streets are in such a condition that equestrian exercise is impracticable. No matter. No matter. Where is our suite? Your Grace, I am here. Why do you not do yourself the honour to kneel when you address His Grace? My love, it's so small a matter. Still, you may as well do it. The young man seems to entertain but an imperfect appreciation of the respect due from a menial to a Castilian hidalgo. My child, you are hard upon our suite. Papa, I've no patience for the presumption of persons in his plebeian position. If he does not appreciate that position, let him be whipped until he does. Let us hope this omission was not intended as a slight. I should be much hurt if I thought it was. So would he. Where do the halberdiers who were to have had the honour of meeting us here, that our visit to the Grand Inquisitor might be made in becoming state? Your Grace, the halberdiers are mercenary people who stipulated for a trifle on account. How tiresome. Well, let us hope that the Grand Inquisitor is a blind gentleman. And the band who were to have had the honour of escorting us? I see no band. Your Grace, The band are sordid persons who require to be paid in advance. That's so like a band. Insuperable difficulties meet me at every turn. But surely they know His Grace? Exactly. They know His Grace. Well, let us hope that the Grand Inquisitor is a deaf gentleman. A cornetta piston would be something. You do not happen to possess the accomplishment of tootling like a cornetta piston? Alas, no, Your Grace. But I can imitate a farmyard. I don't see how that would help us. I don't see how we could bring it in. It would not help us in the least. We are not a parcel of graziers come to market, dolt. My love! Our sweet feelings! Be so good as to ring the bell and inform the Grand Inquisitor that His Grace the Duke of Platatoro, Count Matadoro, Baron Picadoro, and sweet have arrived at Venice and seek, demand an audience. Your Grace has but to command. I felt sure of it. And now, my love, shall we tell her? I think so. And now, my love, prepare for a magnificent surprise. It is my agreeable duty to reveal to you a secret which should make you the happiest young lady in Venice. A secret? A secret which, for state reasons, it has been necessary to preserve for 20 years. When you were a prattling babe of 6 months old, you were married by proxy to no less a personage than the infant son of the heir of His Majesty, the immeasurably wealthy King of Barataria. Married to the infant son of the King of Barataria? Was I consulted? Then it was a most unpardonable liberty. Consider his extreme youth, and forgive him. Shortly after the ceremony, that misguided monarch abandoned the creed of his forefathers and became a Wesleyan Methodist of the most bigoted and persecuting type. The Grand Inquisitor, determined that the innovation should not be perpetuated in Barataria, caused your smiling and unconscious husband to be stolen and conveyed to Venice. A fortnight since, the Methodist monarch and all his Wesleyan court were killed in an insurrection, and we are here to ascertain the whereabouts of your husband and to hail you, our daughter, as Her Majesty, the reigning Queen of Barataria. Your Majesty! It is at such moments as these that one feels how necessary it is to travel with a full band. I? The Queen of Barataria? But I've nothing to wear. We are practically penniless. That point has not escaped me. Although I am unhappily in straitened circumstances at present, my social influence is something enormous, and a company, to be called the Duke of Platatoro Limited, is in course of formation to work me. An influential directorate has been secured, and I shall myself join the board after allotment. Am I to understand that the Queen of Barataria may be called upon at any time to witness her honoured sire in process of liquidation? The speculation is not exempt from that drawback. If your father should stop, it will, of course, be necessary to wind him up. But it's so undignified. It's so degrading. A grandee of Spain turned into a public company. Such a thing was never heard of. My child, the Duke of Platatoro does not follow fashions. He leads them. He always leads everybody. When he was in the army, he led his regiment. He occasionally led them into action. He invariably led them out of it. So what's interesting about this dialogue is that I happen to know from making all the dialogue before I started this video that it lasts 33 minutes in total, but this dialogue lasts 6 minutes. So this actually makes up quite a big chunk of all the Gondoliers dialogue. In fact, there are 3 scenes like this. There are 3 scenes that are very, very long in the Gondoliers. And from the comment thread on Facebook the other day, it seems like a lot of people find that this scene has a dip in energy. And yeah, of course it's a dip of energy if you're comparing it to what's just come before, because what's just come before is this amazing, like, sparkling musical masterpiece. So anything following that, that's going to be tremendously hard to do. And of course, remember that you get their lovely introduction song, If Ever We Go Back to to Spain, we will never, never, never cross the sea again. And, which is a banger. I love that song. I know it didn't do too well on the Quartet's list, but I really, really like that one. It's kind of pattery as well. But hey, I actually love this scene. The only part where I start to lose a bit of focus is all that stuff about, oh, the speculation may be exempt from that drawback. The whole subplot about the Duke being made into a limited company, I don't particularly understand. This is something that they do way better in Utopia Limited. I don't really quite get the point of it here. I think maybe, I'm assuming this, but maybe public companies have just become a thing that's happening, and Gilbert's just using an opportunity to like say, oh, this could be a company, this could be a company. But I mean, it's equivalent to someone just holding up a sign saying Brexit on it and everyone laughing. Like, I don't really see what it adds to the plot of the Gondoliers, or even to the characters of the Duke and the Duchess. It makes their song make sense, but I don't see why they couldn't have just come up with this idea later. I don't know. But that's the point where I start to lose concentration with it. But other than that, I think it's really funny. The whole thing about them not having a suite because they're so poor, brilliant. The thing about imitating a farmyard, I don't see how that could help us. I don't see how we could bring it in. Insuperable difficulties meet me at every turn. I know that's Will's favourite line. It's just such a ridiculous thing for a person to say. Another line that Will pointed out to me as being very funny, which I agree with, is when Casilda says, well, that was the most unpardonable liberty. And the Duke says, consider his extreme youth and forgive him. It's one of those lines that, if you try and say it in a silly way, it probably won't be that funny, but it's funny because it's just such a ridiculous thing to say. Consider his extreme youth and forgive him. Because it's kind of true. Like, he was only like one himself. He didn't know what he was doing. Where Yeoman was like a little bit more natural and conversational, most of these lines are things that people wouldn't ever say, which reminds me more of Pirates of Penzance than anything that's happened since then. And I think they take this further in the Grand Duke and it's a little bit more successful then. But I do appreciate that there's some attempt here to make really awesome, like colourful characters, even if you don't quite get who they are and what they want. I love the Duke and Duchess in this scene. They're brilliant, they're funny, even though you don't really know who they are. But you kind of get who they are. You get that they're very proud, you know, they come from old money despite being quite poor at the moment. And they're very noble and like attached to this idea of class, but in such a way that's very likeable and charming because they're just so silly. And then Lewis is like the straight one in the scene. He's not particularly funny at all, but he sets up other people's lines. Oh, actually, well, yes, they know his grace. And so he has all the kind of deadpan lines, whereas the Duke and Duchess have all the silly lines. Casilda, you can get a lot out of Casilda. I played her a year ago and again a few months ago, and I really love these lines. Papa, I have no patience for the presumption of persons in his plebeian position. If he does not appreciate that position, then let him be whipped until he does. And there are so many ways you can say that. You can say it deadpan. You can say it in this really sadistic way. You can say it in a very over-the-top way. Everything's valid. I've seen Casilda played several different ways. She's not a particularly, like, relatable character because she's so rich, but I also think that she's a very sweet and warm character, and you can really bring out her personality here, only to have it come back in the next scene, which is a bit more romantic. But this, yeah, it's a good scene. I wouldn't say it's particularly beautiful. I'd probably only give it a 5 for beauty and poetry, but I would give it a 16 out of 20 for comedy. There are some great lines in there and very few dull moments, just that little bit about the company. And the thing is, narrative importance, I think it delivers the exposition really well. I think there's that speech that the Duke gives about the Wesleyan Methodist, the bigoted and persecuting type. And everyone always laughs at that, and I don't really get the joke. I think maybe I'm just losing concentration because the line's so long. So I'm going to give that a 9 for narrative importance, actually, because I don't really think all of it is particularly easy to follow, but most of it is. And character, I'm going to give it a 7, because even though we're seeing people's personalities come through just by the way the lines are written, we don't really have a good idea about what these people want yet. So I'm just going to give that a 7 for now. But that is a pretty good score, I think, for this scene. It gets a 37 out of 50, and I don't imagine that will be at all bad.
Oh, Louis, what have you said? What have I done? What have I allowed you to do?
Nothing, I trust, that you will ever have reason to repent.
Nay, Louis, it may not be. I have embraced you for the last time.
Casilda!
I have just learnt, to my surprise and indignation, that I was wed in babyhood to the infant son of the King of Barataria.
The son of the King of Barataria? The child who was stolen in infancy by the Inquisition?
The same. But of course you know his story.
Know his story? Why, I have often told you that my mother was the nurse to whose charge he was entrusted.
True, I had forgotten. Well, he has been discovered, and my father has brought me here to claim his hand.
But you will not recognise this marriage. It took place when you were too young to understand its import.
Nay, Louis, respect my principles, and cease to torture me with vain entreaties. Henceforth, I am another's.
But stay! The present and the future, they are another's, but the past, at least that is ours, and none can take it from us. As we may revel in naught else, let us revel in that.
I don't think I grasp your meaning.
Yet it is logical enough. You say you cease to love me.
I say I may not love you.
Ah, but you did not say you did not love me.
I loved you with a frenzy that words are powerless to express, and that but 10 brief minutes since.
Exactly. My own, that is, until 10 minutes since, my own, my lately loved, my recently adored. Tell me that until, say, a quarter of an hour ago, I was all in all to thee.
I see your idea. It's ingenious. But don't do that.
There can be no harm in revelling in the past.
None whatever. But an embrace cannot be taken to act retrospectively. We may recollect an embrace. I recollect many. But we must not repeat them.
Then let us recollect a few. Oh, Casilda, you are to me as the sun is to the earth.
A quarter of an hour ago.
About that.
And to think that but for this miserable discovery you would have been my own for life.
Through life and death. A quarter of an hour ago.
How greedily my thirsty ears would have drunk the golden melody of those sweet words well, it's now about 20 minutes since.
About that. In such a matter one cannot be too precise.
And now, our love, so full of life, is but a silent, solemn memory.
Must it be so, Casilda?
Louis, it must be so.
So, as you can see, I use the full version of this dialogue, which I actually used initially by mistake when I was directing this a year ago, because I tend to learn my lines and think how I'm going to direct shows just by using the web operas on the GNS archive. It's kind of easy because it's online. So I tend to do that, and that is the version of the scene that's online. But when you read about this in the Bradley, it's cut that whole bit about how greedily my thirsty ears have drunk the golden melody of their sweet words. It cuts a good deal of that joke about how long in the past they can say they loved each other. It's 10 minutes and it's 15 and it's 20. And I personally really like that. I think it can be quite snappy and go really quick, and it's a silly, logical, not fallacy, that's the wrong word, but it's like something that doesn't actually make any logical sense and wouldn't really make anyone feel better in the real world, but it makes these characters feel better. And I actually find that really sweet and charming. I don't mind that at all. I think a lot of people think that this dialogue goes on too long if you include that, but I don't agree at all. I think that dialogue is really nice, and I can see why people do omit it, but I especially like the let us recollect a few embraces. An embrace cannot be taken to act retrospectively. We may recollect an embrace. I recollect many, but we must not repeat them. I think that's great. It really gives them a lot of personality. And I think as a result of that, I would give this scene quite a high character mark, because we are learning about how these two manifest their love for each other. Like they're teasing each other, but they're also very respectful of each other's views. So like as soon as Casilda says, no, Louis, respect my principles, he immediately does respect her. But then he tries to find a way around it. So it's quite nice that he's this very kind of straight, sensible, logical guy who is quite matter of fact when he speaks, but because of that, he's very logical and is trying to find a logical solution to this. But Casilda's a very emotional person, as we've seen so far. And so he's trying to win her around by kind of trying to get her to see the logic of it. So yes, the present and the future, they may not be ours, but the past is ours. Nobody can ever take that away from us. And that's actually very sweet. And the song that follows is a very good duet. I think it's a beautiful scene and a beautiful song for character for Luiz and Casilda. Comedy, I don't think it's quite as good as the scene before it. I'm going to give it a 12 because I do think that the notion of the past being just as valuable as the present and future is kind of both true but also just really unhelpful given the situation. Would that really comfort people in this situation? Maybe it would. Have any of you guys been in a situation like this? Like, tell me, like, I suppose memories of past relationships do kind of if it, oh, that's nice, but not if I was still in love with them. That would be very, very bad. Beauty poetry, I'm going to give this an A to. I think there's some lovely words in here. How greedily my thirsty ears would have drunk the golden melody of those sweet words. It's a little bit cheesy, but I do appreciate that it is quite beautiful. Oh, Louis, what have you said? What have I done? What have I allowed you to do? It is overly dramatic, overly emotional, but it is beautiful. Narrative importance, I'm going to just give a 7 too. The thing is, the narrative importance marks are a little bit messed up in this opera because there isn't really a main narrative to latch on to. We do learn a little bit. She was the mother to whose child she was entrusted. And it's so hard not to telegraph that. Like, oh, that's not a nice line to have to say because you know the audience, especially the ones who know the story. And that often gets a laugh. It's like, no, just don't. Try not to telegraph the ending of the show. But it's really hard not to because that line it's so placed and it's so obvious. So I'm just going to give it a 6 for narrative importance because I think that in trying to just set up the ending, but in that way that I think is a bit too obvious, it does kind of trivialise it a bit. I suppose that when people have seen all these GNS operas, the people initially alive in the Victorian times would have seen all the ones before. They probably would have known that it was going to end up well for them. Or would they? Because they have just seen Yeoman of the Guard, so who knows? Who knows? But it is telegraphed, I think, that these two are probably going to get together at the end. And so you don't really feel like they're in any danger of not being together. You don't really feel the stakes, I think. Even though they are lovely characters, it's just the only reason she's saying no is out of nobility, because Lewis is totally right. She could just probably say, well, look, I didn't consent to this. I can just annul this marriage because I've never even met this person. I mean, she could do that, surely? Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe the rules in nobility are different. But it seems like there must be a way out of this for her where she could be with him. And if she really loved him that much, why wouldn't she just do that? I don't know. I'm not Casilda, but I am in love, and I know that if I was put in that situation, there isn't really much that could make me dump somebody I loved. I don't really buy that. That's something that only really happens in the Gilbertian universe. I suppose royalty in those days would have been forced to make all kinds of decisions for the sake of their country, for the sake of their family. It was a very different world, and I appreciate that. But I still find this quite hard to relate to as a person alive today. Still, lovely little scene. Let's see what it gets in total. This one gets in total a 34, so it doesn't do quite as well as the one before it.
My child, allow me to present to you his distinction, Don Alhambra de Valero, the Grand Inquisitor of Spain. It was his distinction who so thoughtfully abstracted your infant husband and brought him to Venice. So, this is the little lady who is so unexpectedly called upon to assume the functions of royalty. And a very nice little lady, too. Jimp, isn't she? Distinctly Jimp. Allow me. Naughty temper! You must make some allowance. Her Majesty's head is a little turned by her access of dignity. I could have wished that Her Majesty's access of dignity had turned it in this direction. Unfortunately, if I am not mistaken, there appears to be some little doubt as to His Majesty's whereabouts.
A doubt as to his whereabouts? Then we might yet be saved.
A doubt? Oh dear, no. No doubt at all. He is here, in Venice, plying the modest but picturesque calling of a gondolier. I can give you his address. I see him every day. In the entire annals of our history, there is absolutely no circumstance so entirely free from all manner of doubt of any kind whatever. Listen, and I'll tell you all about it.
Then do you mean to say that I am married to one of two gondoliers, but it is impossible to say which?
Without any doubt of any kind whatever. But be reassured, the nurse to whom your husband was entrusted is the mother of the musical young man who is such a past master of that delicately modulated instrument. She can, no doubt, establish the king's identity beyond all question.
Heavens, how did he know that?
My young friend, a Grand Inquisitor is always up to date. His mother is at present the wife of a highly respectable and old-established brigand who carries on an extensive practice in the mountains around Cordova. Accompanied by two of my emissaries, he will set off at once for his mother's address. She will return with them, and if she finds any difficulty in making up her mind, the persuasive influence of the torture chamber will jog her memory.
As you can see, I put these two scenes together because they contain all of the same people and they're discussing the same thing. Now, unusually, most of the narrative is about what happened that led to these circumstances. It's actually in the song that's in the middle of these two bits of dialogue. So even though I would say there is narrative in this scene, I think it's kind of imparted in a bit of a convoluted way that makes it quite difficult to keep track of. I'm going to give it a 6. Maybe this is down to my ADHD tendencies, but I find it terribly hard to follow what Donal is saying about the mountains and Cordova and like where she is now and the fact they've gone to collect her. I find that all a bit confusing and difficult to follow. And I would also say that while I love Donal, and I think his lines are generally really funny, I don't think this is like his best scene for comedy. I think that, I'd give it maybe like a 5 for beauty poetry. I don't think there's really too much poetry in it at all. In fact, I'm going to give it a 4. I don't think it's really that skillful writing, compared to some of Gilbert's other works, of course. Comedy, though, there are no laugh-out-loud jokes in this. I mean, I think the closest we get is I wish Her Majesty's access of dignity would have turned it in this direction, but that can come across as a bit, like, pervy, and I think that isn't funny and that is a bit gross. The other bit that I think is funny is I know where he lives. I see him every day. I could take you to him. So I do like that bit. I do think that's kind of funny. But really, a lot of the comedy, I think, is mainly in the delivery of this, and it's more comic potential than actual comedy. So I'm going to give that just a 10 out of 20 for comedy. Character. Do we get to learn about who Donal is? I think we kind of do. I mean, again, it's more of a vehicle for the actor rather than really spelling out to the actor who he is. Usually when I see Donal, he's very dignified and pompous, but I don't like having him like that, because even though that is a perfectly valid interpretation and it's probably more in keeping with the text than what I do, I just find that problematic when he starts saying things about the girls, because it feels a bit weird to have a person who seems so in control of himself and the situation be so openly quite predatory towards girls. But if you kind of make him seem like quite a desperate, silly character, then it certainly makes that predatoriness hit less. So that's the reason I played him like a bit zany, and that's why Rowley, who was like the best Donal I've ever seen, who was in my production of Gondoliers, certainly he inspired my performance of it in this video, if that can be called a performance. But he was just spectacular. He got great feedback, both kind of by clapping on the night and also afterwards in internet conversations and in like the festival club and things. So he got really great feedback for his choices, and I am glad that I inspired him to do that, and I'm glad that he did that, and it was so funny and maybe inspired quite a lot of people to play Donal a bit differently than I otherwise would have done. As I say, I'm not criticising other people for playing it in that pompous way. It just means that it takes away a lot of the humour from it, because you feel a bit uncomfortable about how he is around the girls. But if you make him really silly and like ineffectual almost, like, yeah, he's got the power to like execute people, but he just can't get a girl. You know, he just can't do it. And that it does kind of soften him a little bit, which I think is quite important if you're trying to make things non-problematic today, really. But hey, again, no criticism. I'm open to seeing pretty much anything. So yeah, character, I do think Donal is represented quite well. I'm going to give that an 8. I do think that even though it's not cut and dry exactly who he should be, it does give the actor a lot of scope to make a lot of choices themselves. So all in all, this scene gets a 28 out of 50. That's just above half. For those that are brilliant at maths, 25 is in fact half of 50. So 28 is 3 more than that.
And now our lives are going to begin in real earnest. What's a bachelor? A mere nothing. He's a chrysalis. He can't be said to live. He exists. What a delightful institution marriage is. Why have we wasted all this time? Why didn't we marry you 10 years ago?
Because you couldn't find anybody nice enough. Because you were waiting for us.
I suppose that was the reason. We were waiting for you without knowing it. Hello. Good morning. If this is an undertaker, it is a bad omen. Ceremony of some sort going on? He is an undertaker. No, a little unimportant family gathering, nothing in your line. Somebody's birthday, I suppose. Yes, mine. And mine. And mine. And mine. Curious coincidence. And how old may you all be? It's a rude question, but about 10 minutes. Remarkably fine children. But surely you're jesting.
In other words, we were married about 10 minutes since.
Married? You don't mean to say you are married? Oh, yes, we are married. What? Both of you? All 4 of us? Bless my heart. How extremely awkward.
You don't mind, I suppose? You were not thinking of either of us for yourself, I presume.
Oh, Giuseppe, look at him. He's heartbroken. No, I wasn't. Now, my man, we don't want anything in your line today, and if your curiosity's satisfied, you can go. You mustn't call me your man. It's a liberty. I don't think you know who I am. Not we, indeed. We are jolly gondoliers, the sons of Baptisto Palmieri, who led the last revolution. Republicans, heart and soul. We hold all men to be equal. As we abhor oppression, we abhor kings. As we detest vainglory, we detest rank. As we despise effeminacy, we despise wealth. We are Venetian gondoliers, your equals in everything except our calling, and in that at once your masters and your servants. Bless my heart. How unfortunate. One of you may be Baptisto's son, for anything I know to the contrary, but the other is no less a personage than the only son of the late king of Barataria. What? And I trust It was the one who slapped me on the shoulder and called me his man.
One of us. A king?
Not brothers!
The king of Barataria.
Well, who'd have thought it? But which is it?
What does it matter? As you are both Republicans and hold kings in detestation, of course you'll abdicate at once. Good morning.
No, don't do that! Well, as to that, of course there are kings. And kings. When I say I detest kings, I mean I detest bad kings.
It's a delicate distinction.
Quite so. Now, I can conceive of a kind of king, an ideal king, the creature of my fancy, you know, who would be absolutely unobjectionable. A king, for instance, who would abolish taxes and make everything cheap, except gondolas, and give a great many free entertainments to the gondoliers, and let off the fireworks on the Grand Canal and engage all the gondolas for the occasion, and scramble money on the Rialto among the gondoliers. Such a king would be a blessing to his people, and if I were a king, that is the sort of king I would be. And so would I. Come, I'm glad to find your objections are not insuperable. Oh, they're not insuperable. No, they're not insuperable. Besides, we are open to conviction.
Yes, they are open to conviction. Oh, they've often been convicted.
Our views may have been hastily formed on insufficient grounds. They may be crude, ill-digested, erroneous. I've a very poor opinion of the politician who is not open to conviction.
Oh, he's a fine fellow.
Yes, that's the sort of politician for my money. Then we'll consider it settled. Now, as the country is in a state of insurrection, it is absolutely necessary that you should assume the reins of government at once. And until it is ascertained which of you is to be king, I have arranged that you will reign jointly, so that no question can arise hereafter as to the validity of any of your acts.
As one individual?
As one individual. Like this. Something like that.
And may we take our friends with us and give them places about the court?
Undoubtedly. That's always done. I'm convinced. So am I. Then the sooner we're off, the better. We'll just run home and pack up a few things. Stop! Stop. That won't do at all. Ladies are not admitted. What? Not admitted. Not at present. Afterwards, perhaps. We'll see. Why, you don't mean to say you are going to separate us from our wives? This is very awkward. Only for a time. A few months. After all, what is a few months?
But we've only been married half an hour.
What I love most about this scene is how frustrating it is for Don Al to talk to them, because they are just so not on his intellectual level. So it's really hard for him to like explain everything to them and like get a word in. So especially when he's like, I don't think you know who I am. Not we indeed. We are Jolly Gondoliers. And they just launch into who they are, not caring about who he is. And he's like forever, he's trying to get his point in, but like they're just not letting him speak. And then when they eventually do, when he says, well, actually, when if you might be a king, they're like, suddenly they're really listening to him. But even then, they don't really seem to quite get what he's saying a lot of the time. And oh, the things they come out with. These guys are just so stupid. Like they really are. Like, oh, well, like, I would be a great king. What I do is all these great things for the gondoliers. I would say the only bit of this scene that I find is a bit of a lull, which I actually cut out of my Hever Castle show, because I thought it actually made the scene run a bit better, was that whole thing about them being open to conviction, because that's the only joke that I don't really know how to deliver, like I don't really get it. So, okay, I guess the joke is that they are open to conviction and they have often been convicted are very different things to say, because the letter is implying they've like committed a crime and they've been convicted of a crime, but that isn't what Giuseppe meant when he said it. And so I suppose if you make it out like Tessa is particularly stupid and Giuseppe's like, oh, what did you say? Or like maybe they're all joining in with that. Maybe they all just don't understand how to use language properly. And so I suppose that if you really said it like these characters believe what they're saying, if they have conviction in what they're saying would work. I think I just don't like it when they go to the audience, yes, they've often been convicted. It's like, no, the character who says that line, Tessa, like, she cannot know what that means. She can't be in on that joke, because if she is, what is she saying? She's like saying, yeah, he's actually secretly a criminal and that makes this funny. It's like, no, it's that they just don't get the meaning of the word. And I think when I think that I don't like this scene, I'm just thinking of iterations I've seen on it. I'm thinking of iterations I've seen of it where, like, the girls are always like, no, they're not insufferable, you know, when they always speak like that. But if you just say it like normal people, but people who are maybe a few sandwiches short of a picnic, it actually does work, and it's a really, really funny scene. It's long, but I don't care. There's just so much energy and joy and life in it. Like, oh, hello, good morning. Who are you? Oh, he is an undertaker. I'm like, oh no, he was hoping to marry us. Look, he's heartbroken. No, I wasn't. He's so defensive about it. It's so silly. There are kings, and then there are bad kings. Oh, okay. And when they get excited and they think they're going to come and Donnell crushes that, it's like, oh, we've only been married half an hour. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So yeah, narratively, I give it quite a good mark. I think I give it an 8 for narrative. I think a lot of it is just a lot of people talking, yes, mine, and like all 4 of us, and it's more joy and comedy than it is narrative. But I have given it an 8 for narrative. Character, on the other hand, the quartet as a single unit, I think we are getting to know them, but we're not getting much of a distinction between them. I suppose if I was trying to draw a distinction, I would say that Giuseppe was probably the cleverest one, but of quite a stupid bunch, who loves the sound of his own voice, who's just very into giving long speeches about things, who has a great imagination. He's the kind of person you want to pat on the head and go, oh, that's a good idea. You know, oh, what a great idea. You must be very proud of that idea. But really, you know, his ideas are not practical. But then Marco, like, really looks up to Giuseppe and thinks he's great. He's like, oh yeah, I'd do that as well. Yeah, if I was king, I'd also do that. It's like Giuseppe's really not clever either, and Marco just looks up to him so much. It's very sweet. And then Ginetta seems like a little bit more practical than the others, but she's still not quite all there. She's like a little bit slow. But it's Tessa who was the one that comes up with the, oh, they've often been convicted line. And Tessa does seem like a little bit more romantic than Ginetta. So because certainly when she sings When a Merry Maiden Marries, she's like, every goose becomes a swan, whereas Ginetta is the one that tries to convince Donnell to, like, stop all this. So she seems to be more trying to use logic to get through to Donnell, whereas Tessa's more just a very romantic, flowery person. But I think we are definitely getting this impression of the quartet as one individual more than those separate characteristics, because like that was me reaching. I was really reaching for that, whereas the quartet as a whole, they are just this bundle of funny, bright sunshine and life. And I think when people play it when they kind of don't like each other, or they're really sarcastic and bitter, or they have like overly high voices, like that just completely kills them for me. Like, I love seeing them when they're really in love, when they're just so obsessed with each other. And even, you know, not even just the two couples separately. I think they all just love each other so much. Like, Tessa and Ginetta are just absolute best friends. Even when they're having like a little bit of jealousy later, they still really love each other. If From My Sister I Were Torn, it could be born, I should no doubt be horrified, but I could bear it. Like, that's her just being really honest. You know, but she's saying that would be a really horrible thing. I'd hate to leave Tessa. I love Tessa. And also, like, Tessa and Marco get on, and Ginetta and Giuseppe get on. You know, they're all a lovely, not quite polyamorous, but they're all like a lovely, well, maybe it could be. Maybe someone could do that one day. But they are all just a lovely group of people, but they're very idealistic, and in a way they have just not thought through at all. Like, initial ideas for policies are, oh, let's just give loads of money to gondoliers. But they've not really thought about what it takes to be king in any way. But also Donald's very honest about it, you know, when they say, oh, can we take all our friends with us and put them around the court? What an innocent question. So many people would have, like, tried to, like, get that question asked a bit more subtly. Like, so if I've got this friend who's, like, really organised, like, maybe, like, can I take him with me and, like, give him a job? But he's like, oh, can we take all our friends with us and give them paces around the court? And it's like, yes, that's always done. I really appreciate how honest he was in asking that question. So yeah, all in all, this is just one of the funniest scenes, I think, in the show. I'm going to give this an 18 out of 20 for comedy. Beauty, poetry, yeah, I think there are some nice moments there too. I think that Giuseppe's speech about as we despise this, we love that, and I don't know it off by heart, but there's this lovely language that he uses, and just generally the rhythm of it, I think, is really good. What, both of you? All four of us? Me and me and me and me. You know, it's just lovely, and I think that deserves. I say it deserves a 6. Like, nothing in Gondoliers is particularly poetical, but it is nice. It is nice, this scene. Character, yes. So we definitely learn more about Ducal. We learn more about the quartet. As I say, more as a whole than as individuals, but as close as we're going to get. So I'm going to give that a 9, just because the quartet are not particularly individual. But hey, all in all, that gives it a mark of 41 out of 50. So this is the winning scene so far.
Gentlemen, we are much obliged to you for your expressions of satisfaction and good feeling. I say, we are much obliged to you for your expressions of satisfaction and good feeling. We heard you. We are delighted at any time to fall in with sentiments so charmingly expressed. That's all right. At the same time, there is just one little grievance that we should like to ventilate. What? Don't be alarmed. It's not serious. It is arranged that, until it is decided which of us two is the actual king, we are to act as one person. Exactly. Now, although we act as one person, we are, in point of fact, 2 persons. I don't think we can go into that. It is a legal fiction, and legal fictions are solemn things. Situated as we are, we cannot recognise 2 independent responsibilities. No, but you can recognise 2 independent appetites. It's all very well to say we act as one person, but when you supply us with only 1 ration between us, I should describe it as a legal fiction carried a little too far. It's a rather nice point. I don't like to express an opinion offhand. Suppose we reserve it for argument before the full court. Yes, but what are we to do in the meantime? We want our tea. I think we may make an interim order for double rations on their Majesties entering into the usual undertaking to indemnify in the event of an adverse decision. That, I think, will meet the case. But you must work hard. Stick to it. Nothing like work. Oh, certainly. We quite understand that a man who holds the magnificent position of king should do something to justify it. We are called Your Majesty. We are allowed to buy ourselves magnificent clothes. Our subjects frequently nod to us in the streets. The sentries always return our salutes. And we enjoy the inestimable privilege of heading the subscription list to all the principal charities. In return for these advantages, the least we can do is make ourselves useful about the palace.
What is so spectacularly interesting about me doing this series and just my life with GNS in general is how often I discover like something new that really transforms the way I think about characters or about a show in general. And I kind of just had one of those epiphanies. I don't think it's a massive epiphany, but it's a shame that I have directed Gondoliers twice in the last year, and this actually only occurred to me when making this video. That's why, like, I'd honestly really recommend any director making a video like this, because it really like makes you think, like, how would I just say those lines, like, without planning it, not really thinking about it, but just how would these come out if I were to say them? And by doing that, you kind of understand them a bit better. You kind of get the lines a bit more. And I'm now really getting this impression that I didn't get before. And you guys are going to laugh at me. You guys are going to go, well, obviously that's what it's about, Rachel. Like, duh. But I hadn't really quite got this. Like, maybe I kind of had a little bit, but I hadn't realised to quite the extent that this is true. I've just realised that possibly what's happening here is that Marco and Giuseppe, maybe this is even the reason why they were so popular in the first place by both the contadine and the other gondoliers, is that they're just incredibly generous. But because they're not terribly sharp or clever, it means that people can easily take advantage of them. And I think that is so true of this scene, because they're kings. And yet the guys are just sitting around and they're doing all the work, and they're like, well, yeah, we get so many privileges. Like, we get to decide like which charities to give to, and like people nod to us in the street. Like, the sentries always wave, and people are so polite to us. So like, yeah, the least we can do is make ourselves useful. So like, we do all this and all this and all this, but there is like one really small thing, and I don't want to be a bother, but you've kind of been starving us for 3 months. We've only been having half food. Like, is there any chance we could get like enough food for 2 people? Oh, I don't know about that. These guys are so mean to Marco and Giuseppe. It's so funny how, and these are friends that Marco and Giuseppe took to like be in the court. Like, you'd think they'd be a bit more grateful, but they're really taking advantage of Marco and Giuseppe's generosity, and in a way that it's really heartwarming. It makes you kind of look at Marco and Giuseppe in a different way, because it makes you realise these guys are just so generous to the people they love. And actually, of course, you'd want to be married to them. They're just really awesome people. But yeah, they're really being taken advantage of as well. And I know the line, we want our tea. That was actually put in by Rutland Barrington. That was an ad-lib which Gilbert said, yes, that'll be okay. And then somebody had to explain the concept of an ad-lib to Queen Victoria. I've read about this in Bradley, but I find that really funny. So if you have not yet read that bit, you should buy the Bradley and look at that. But that really did make me think that I think the reason it took me so long to get this is because all the productions of the Gondoliers I've seen have had Marco and Giuseppe being quite like angry in this scene, like, we want our tea. It's like, well, no, like what got them into this position is because they just bend over backwards to be nice to everyone. That's the problem. Because even with Donnell, like, they didn't want him there, but they were being so polite about it. They were like, well, if you know, eventually they say, well, if you've got what you want, you can go. But like, that's after like a really long time of talking to him. Like, they're so sweet, and they've really taken advantage of. And like, it is just very clear that these gentlemen are kind of really enjoying being like total Jobsworths about it. They're really enjoying taking all this stuff to the extreme. And even though they've been loaded with honours and they live this luxurious life where they want for nothing, Marco and Giuseppe are like, oh God, they're just so nice. They're so nice. In fact, there's more of that in the scene that follows. But yeah, this is where you get a taste of it. And I think the trouble is with Gondoliers, because there are so many different little plot threads and so many themes, you don't really get which one's the overarching one. But this is good, this one. I think it does. Maybe there's the point here that there will always be people that if you're nice to them, they'll just be ungrateful and take advantage of you. So don't let yourself be taken advantage of. That's good advice. Oh yeah, I need to actually mark this scene. So it is. I think I'm going to give it like the standard mark of a 6 of Beatty/poetry. I don't think it kind of really bridges that gap of being amazing, but it's quite nice. Comedy, I'm going to give this one a 14. I think it's kind of generally funny, just with all the stuff I was saying, but I don't think it's got any particular lines in that are really laugh out loud funny, apart from we want our tea. And that totally depends on how it's said. Like, I really think the we want our tea, like as if they're just really starving and like, oh, I just have a little bit of a problem, I'm going to be really polite about it. Reminds me of when I broke my ribs. When I broke my ribs like a year and a bit ago, and I was like, so I think there might be something wrong with my ribs, like that I'm in quite a lot of pain all the time. Like, do you think I might have cracked or broken them? No, you'd know if he'd broken your ribs. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I kind of think I'm I do know that I have. And I was like, no, but you'd know, like, you'd be in agony. Well, I am in quite a lot of pain all the time. And then I went to the hospital and they x-rayed me, but they x-rayed the wrong side of my ribs. I was in Italy. I think wires got crossed. I don't know. And then it was I was seen really quickly. It was great. But yeah, they just x-rayed the wrong part of me. And then they were like, yeah, you haven't broken your ribs. So you probably just bruised them. I mean, take a paracetamol. I'm like, I'm in quite a lot of pain. Are you sure? They're like, yeah, no, there's definitely no break. You're good. And then the next day, I laughed and like I think it got worse. It like cracked further or whatever. And then I was just in absolute agony, and I still kept getting there. But you'd know if you'd broken your ribs, and I'm literally like hyperventilating and crying and sobbing. Like I really think I've broken my ribs. No, you'd know if you'd broken your ribs. I really think I have broken my ribs. So this is what you get by being too polite. Because of that, like I bet if they'd actually discovered it the first time before I'd made them worse, they probably would have healed way quicker. But because I was too polite about it and I just like believed people, like don't ever think you're being a bother. Like since that, I've never thought I'm being a bother for saying I'm in pain ever again. Because my body was screaming at me that something was really wrong, but everyone else just kept like underestimating me. I think that happens to females a lot actually. Like we often get belittled in doctor surgeries. Oh, you can't be in that much pain because you're like dealing with it so well. They even said that to me in the hospital. They said, well, we don't think you have broken your ribs because if you'd broken your ribs, you'd be in more pain. I was like, I am in a lot of pain. They were like, but we're not really seeing evidence of that pain. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I just deal with a lot of pain a lot. So, so yeah, doctors, please listen to women. And females really. Please listen to females when they tell you they're in pain, because we're trained to be polite and not be a bother. So I've gone really off my point. But yeah, character. Yes, I think all the stuff I was saying about them being overly polite, yeah, that is something. I'm going to give that an 8 for character. Narrative importance, I'm only going to give that a 6. I don't think anything we learn is particularly anything to do with the plot. And hey, that gets it a 34, which draws it with Luiz and Casilda. Maybe we'll break that tie right now so we don't have to do anything later. I think the Luiz and Casilda scene is better. It's longer, there's more meat in it, so I'm going to find one place to give it a higher mark. And I only gave it a 12 for comedy, so I think I'm actually going to change that 12 to a 13, and that'll break the tie. So we're doing that.
Yes, it really is a very pleasant existence. They're also singularly kind and considerate. You don't find them wanting to do this or wanting to do that, or saying, it's my turn now. No, they let us have all the fun to ourselves and never seem to grudge it. It makes one feel quite selfish. It almost seems like taking advantage of their good nature. How nice they were about the double rations. Most considerate. There's only one thing wanting to make us thoroughly comfortable. And that is the dear little wives we left behind us 3 months ago. Yes, it is dull without female society. We can do without everything else, but we can't do without that. And if we have that imperfection, we have everything. There is only one recipe for perfect happiness.
I can't believe how stupid I am for like not getting this before. I'm blaming previous productions of the Gondoliers I've seen, which didn't really make this clear to me. But yeah, the joke is that they're saying, oh, I hope we're not taking advantage of these men by like taking all these really fun tasks away from them. Yeah, it seems like we're taking advantage of their good nature. And they were so nice about the double rations. It's like, guys, they were starving you for 3 months. Oh my God, they knew what they were doing, and you had to ask after 3 months. And at first they refused, like you had to beg for them to feed you properly. They're like, I'm afraid we're taking advantage of them. I just never really realised that before. I'd never really kind of got how funny that is, but that is so funny. And then the thing about, there's only one thing that can make our lives complete, you know. Yeah, which is, well, the dear little wives we left at home. It was just like forgotten. The thing is, I don't think he's forgotten for like unkind reasons. They're just not quite all there. I think that's the issue with these guys. And then Marcus says something quite interesting, which is, it is dull without female company, which kind of implies, and then his following song, it kind of implies to me that they're not really feeling very like sexy things about these girls, and they never really seem, I mean, I know there's not really much of that in GNS anyway, but it's like, I wonder if there's kind of like an ace vibe around these two couples. It's kind of like an ace polyamory vibe, and that is something really cool. I'm always trying to find LGBTQ plus characteristics in GNS characters, because the world is just a bit more colourful when you have that. You could really imagine these characters to be like Ace, because Marco's saying it's very dull without female company. And that's like an odd turn of phrase. It's not like, oh, you know, I miss Gianetta and like being intimate with her. I mean, I guess he hasn't yet been intimate with her, they only just got married. But that's a very inclusive, nice thing to say. It's dull without female company, which implies that he understands that actually just having men around, like, you're only really getting like roughly half of the fun you would get, because it's just, you know, people are different. Especially in those days, males and females would have been raised very differently in those days. So you're getting a whole new world of fun and possibilities when you get all the females to join you. Yeah, so this is quite a short scene, so I'm not going to spend a long time talking about it, but like, I do think it's funny, but it is just short. So I'm only going to give it a 5 for beauty poetry, because none of these scenes are particularly advanced, like language-wise. And I think I'm going to give it a 12 for comedy, but it is just so short, I don't think it really gets any more than that. Character 7, like, you do get more character from Marco and Giuseppe, but it's not anything you haven't seen in a scene before. Narrative importance, I'm just going to give that a 5. I don't think it's particularly important. It's just the pre-tapos scene.
This is indeed a most delightful surprise. Yes, we thought you'd like it. You see, it was like this. After you left, we felt very dull and mopey, and the days crawled by, and you never wrote. And at last I said to Gianetta, I can't stand this any longer. Those two poor monarchs haven't got anyone to mend their stockings, or sew on their buttons, or patch their clothes. At least I hope they haven't. Let us all pack up a change and see how they're getting on. And she said, done. And they all said, done. And we asked our Jacopo to lend us his boat, and he said, done. And we've crossed the sea, and thank goodness that's done. And here we are, and I've done. And now which of you is king? And which of us is queen? That we shan't know until nurse turns up. But never mind that. The question is, how shall we celebrate the commencement of our honeymoon? Gentlemen, will you allow us to offer you a magnificent banquet? We will! Thanks very much. And ladies, what do you say to a dance? A banquet and a dance. Oh, it's too much happiness.
So in my opinion, this scene is where the narrative kind of grinds to a halt. This is like the first scene where it's actually kind of anti-narrative. Like they're saying, oh, let's not worry about the plot. Do you guys want to dance? Like, well, we won't know that until nurse arrives. So, like, in the meantime, what do we do? It's so meta. It's so good. I'm going to give that a 4 for narrative. No, I'm going to give it a 3. It's anti-narrative. But does that make it bad? No. I mean, I just got a big kick out of that. And this scene, every single thing is brilliant in this scene. There's not a single line that I don't laugh out loud in. Like, Tessa's whole utterly deranged speech, which, the thing is, I would have a problem with, like, the kind of whole old-fashioned notion of women darning men's socks, etc. But what makes it so ridiculous is that they're kings. There are people darning their socks. Like, they're okay. But just her, like, ridiculous jealousy, but in a way that, you know, it doesn't really feel angry. It just feels like, at least I hope they haven't. She's just a bit odd, is Tessa, and I just find her very, very funny. And, like, will you allow us to offer you a banquet? We will! Thanks very much. This is so silly. I'm going to give this a 19 for comedy. It's going to dock 1 mark for the kind of old-fashioned, like, eye-rollingness about, oh, these poor monarchs haven't got anyone to do all these female jobs, but that's what the Victorians were like. Fair enough. Whatever. I'm not going to blame Gilbert for that. Beauty poetry. I'm actually going to give this a 7. I actually think that, like, Tessa's speech is actually pretty nice. There's a lot of really lovely rhythm in it. And I love the interjections from the chorus, like, we will, a banquet and a dance. It's too much happiness. Character. I'm going to give this 6. I think that the quartet, yeah, they're as delightful as they usually are, but it's so fast that we're not really getting much more than what we've already seen. And this one actually manages to get a 35, which then again gives it a draw. You know what? So I think I was a bit too generous with comedy. I'm going to give it a 17 for comedy, which kind of cuts that tie, which breaks that tie. Because maybe I was laughing so much at the idea that they just say, oh, forget about the story. So I was laughing more at it than with it. I mean, I don't know. Is that fair to say that, like, this is the plot device of just like saying, oh, let's not worry about the plot, let's dance instead? It's so lazy, it's brilliant. Or is it just lazy? Am I laughing at how bad it is? Or is that deliberate? Like, how deliberate is that? And I know that I can hear Will in my head saying that it became more of the fashion in the 1890s and maybe the late 1880s for musical theatre to be more spectacular, colourful, exciting numbers just held together by this loose thread of narrative that was barely a narrative. And that was also the case with these like musical, like Busby Berkeley films in the 20s and 30s. Like, that was very much what theatre seemed to be for a while. Like, the onus wasn't really on finding a great story, it was on just having like just great numbers strung together by something. And so that's kind of, Gondoliers is like a proto version of this, but Utopia and Grand Duke are much better examples of this, and that's why they're the way they are. That's why what plot they do have, like, is either just barely there or it's just a bit zany and not really meant to be any like solid one thing. It's just a lot of crazy things happening at one time. And so certainly when we're looking at Gondoliers, Utopia and Grand Duke, we do have to look at them in a slightly different way to the others. I think we can't really expect the stories to be as clear. And but I'm still judging the dialogue in the same way that I've judged all the other pieces of dialogue. And I think actually looking ahead to the future, there are dialogue scenes on the Grand Duke which I think are actually really good. Maybe not so much in Utopia Limited, but we will get to that one in due course.
Good evening. Fancy ball? No, not exactly. A friendly little dance, that's all. Sorry you're late. But I saw a groom dancing, and a footman.
Yes, that's the Lord High Footman.
And dear me, a common little drummer boy. Oh no, that's the Lord High drummer boy. But surely the servants' hall is the place for these gentry. Oh dear, no, we have appropriated the servants' hall. It's the royal apartment, and accessible only by tickets obtainable at the Lord Chamberlain's office.
We really must have some place that we can call our own.
I'm afraid I'm not quite equal to the intellectual pressure of the conversation. You see, the monarchy has been remodelled on republican principles. What? All departments rank equally, and everybody is at the head of his department. I see. I'm afraid you're annoyed. No, I wouldn't say that. It's not quite what I expected. I'm awfully sorry.
So am I.
By the by, can I offer you anything after your voyage? A plate of macaroni and a rusk? No, nothing. Obliged to be careful. Yes. Gout. You see, in every court there are distinctions that must be observed. There are there? Why, of course. For instance, you wouldn't have a Lord High Chancellor play leapfrog with his own cook.
Why not?
Why not? Because a Lord High Chancellor is a personage of great dignity, who should never, under any circumstances, place himself in the position of being told to tuck in his tuppenny, except by a nobleman of his own rank, a Lord High Archbishop, for instance, might tell a Lord High Chancellor to tuck in his tuppenny. But certainly not a cook, gentlemen. Certainly not a cook. Not even a Lord High Cook. My good friend, that is a rank that is not recognised at the Lord Chamberlain's office. No, no, it won't do. I'll give you an instance in which the experiment was tried.
So from this scene onwards, to a certain extent, we're getting a different story in every scene. Like, every scene has a very clear different theme. And this one is one that does call back to something that happened earlier, which is Donnell sensing that he's not going to particularly like the way that Marco/Giuseppe rule Barataria. So I do appreciate that there is some kind of callback to a previous scene, but I don't really see how it's relating to what they really care about, which is which one of them is king. That's what we care about. You know, where are the Duke and the Duchess? Where's Casilda? Like, it doesn't really seem too important, especially since this is never brought up again. Like, yeah, I guess that they are told by the Duke that their conduct maybe isn't appropriate, but that doesn't really relate to what they're actually talking about in this scene. So I'm going to give that a 6 for narrative, which I think, if anything, is quite generous, to be honest. However, I would say this is one of my favourite scenes for comedy in the whole thing. In fact, this might be the one that I give a higher mark than the one in Act 1 that had Donnell in. I honestly, I'm going to give this one a 19 out of 20 for comedy. I think there's so many funny moments in this. The whole thing about playing leapfrog, like, you mustn't play leapfrog, like, unless with the person of your own rank, because only a person of that rank can tell another person to tuck in his tuppenny. Certainly not a cook, gentlemen, certainly not a cook. Not even a Lord High Cook. Like, they just don't get it. And you can really see in this scene, like, A, how stupid Marco and Giuseppe are. And, like, B, how frustrated Donnell is getting with it. And you can totally play it another way. You can totally play this scene that Marco and Giuseppe totally know they're, like, trolling Donnell. I just find that less funny than the way round that I just said. I think it's funnier if they just honestly have no idea what they're saying. And they just think, oh yeah, we've got a great setup here. And then I was like, what? What are you guys doing? It doesn't make any sense what you're doing. Like, you've been given a kingdom, but you're living in the servants' quarters? Well, yeah, we have to have some place to call our own. Like, no, but you should be sleeping in, like, the royal bedchamber. That's for the servants. Oh no, we don't have any servants. Everyone's equal. Like, oh, bless them. They really are trying. But the thing is, socialism works. Socialism is a great system, but it needs to be run by people who actually, like, understand economics. Because, like, you know, I'm an idealist. I'm enough of a kind of generally intelligent person to know that socialism would work. But I know that I myself couldn't draw up, like, a budget, because I'm not... Well, actually, you know, I do rule a theatrical company, and a man/woman/non-binary person who does that can rule anything. So maybe I could be leader of Britain / the world one day. But, you know, socialism can work, but these guys, they don't really get it. They've taken it to an extreme, which I don't know if Gilbert is trying to say, oh, look at the ridiculousness of what, you know, republicanism / socialism would be if we took it to its extreme, but the thing is, it's not meant to be taken that far. And I don't think the price of shoddy would go up anyway, because, like, it's cheap for a reason. Anyway, beauty poetry. I love it whenever Donnell speaks. I think that he's got some really beautiful language there. I'm gonna give the scene a 7 for that, but it's mostly Donnell's language. I think that he just has this way of words which is just really fun to say. Like, I'm not finding myself stuttering over it so much as I did, you know, when I was reading out Merrill's lines, for example. Like, I find Donnell's lines just go off the page really well. Character. I think that they are really representing themselves very well. We're getting a lot of funny stuff. We're really seeing Donnell's frustration come out, but we're also seeing that he's kind of quite a zany person with ridiculous views himself. because what he's coming out with is also stupid. So yeah, I'm going to give that a solid 8 for character. I do think this is a great scene. I fancy it's done pretty well. It's got a 40, so that means it's not done as well as Woman Act 1, which I think makes sense because that also has the ladies in it and they're really fun. So let's see how the next scene does, which is actually the same people that are in the scene in Act 1.
And now I have some important news to communicate. His Grace the Duke of Platatoro, Her Grace the Duchess, and their beautiful daughter Casilda. I say their beautiful daughter Casilda. We heard you. Have arrived at Barataria and may be here at any moment.
The Duke and Duchess are nothing to us.
But the daughter! The beautiful daughter! Aha! Oh, you're a lucky dog, one of you.
I think you're a very incomprehensible old gentleman.
Not a bit. I'll explain. Many years ago, when you, whichever you are, were a baby, you, whichever you are, were married to a little girl who has grown up to be the most beautiful young lady in Spain. That beautiful young lady will be here to claim you, whichever you are, in half an hour. And I congratulate that one, whichever he is, with all my heart.
Married when a baby?
But we were married 3 months ago. One of you. Only one. The other, whichever it is an unintentional bigamist.
Well, upon my word.
Eh? Who are these young people?
Who are we? Why, they're wives, of course. We've just arrived.
Their wives. Oh dear, this is very unfortunate. Oh dear, this complicates matters. Dear, dear, what will Her Majesty say?
And do you mean to say that one of these monarchs was already married?
And that neither of us will be a queen? That is the idea I intended to convey.
Tessa, my dear, dear child.
Get away, perhaps it's you.
My poor, poor little woman. Don't. Who knows whose husband you are?
And pray, why didn't you tell us all about it before they left Venice? Because if I had, no earthly temptation would have induced these gentlemen to leave two such extremely fascinating and utterly irresistible little ladies.
There's something in that.
I may mention that you will not be kept long in suspense, as the old lady who nursed the royal child is at present in the torture chamber, waiting for me to interview her.
Poor old girl.
Hadn't you better go and put her out of her suspense? Oh, no, there's no hurry. She's all right. She has all the illustrated papers. However, I'll go and interrogate her, and, in the meantime, may I suggest the absolute propriety of you regarding yourselves as single young ladies? Good evening.
Well, here's a pleasant state of things.
Delightful. One of us is married to 2 young ladies, and nobody knows which, and the other is married to 1 young lady whom nobody can identify.
And one of us is married to one of you, and the other is married to nobody.
But which of you is married to which of us, and what's to become of the other? It's quite simple. Observe. 2 husbands have managed to acquire 3 wives. 3 wives, 2 husbands. That's 2/3 of a husband to each wife. Oh, Mount Vesuvius, here we are in arithmetic. My good sir, one can't marry a vulgar fraction.
You've no right to call me a vulgar fraction.
We are getting rather mixed. The situation is entangled. Let's try and comb it out.
I didn't think I particularly liked this scene before because I felt that it's quite antagonistic and everyone's fighting, but now that I'm looking at it with this new spin on, these characters are just really not very clever and are just desperately trying to understand the situation. It makes it a lot funnier. Okay, no, let's think. Right. 2 husbands, 3 wives. That's 2/3 of a husband to each wife. Like, as if that's a solution. That's not... One can't marry a vulgar fraction. You've no right to call me a vulgar fraction. Like, how dare you? It's getting, like, really, really befuddled about something which is simple. Like, the solution isn't in, like, splitting up wives and husbands. No. It's just one of you isn't actually married because one of them was engaged already. That's it. There's no fractions. There's no multiplications. There's no dividing people in half. That doesn't... So I think... Whereas in the past, I'd found this frustrating because I felt like, oh, this is Gilbert trying to do a stupid thing. But actually now I've realised, no, it's the characters that are stupid. They're trying to find a solution that just isn't at all helpful. And that is very funny. So I do think this is a very, very funny scene. Do I think it's as funny as the one before it? I don't know, I'll give it an 18 for now. I don't know if it's quite as funny. But I will say that I think the beauty and poetry in this scene is really good. There's some really lovely things that people say. Let me just find a couple of them. I love Donnell's bit, many years ago when you, whichever you are a baby. You, whichever you are, just all the whichever you are. Like, it sounds like it might be clunky, but they actually fit in really nice. No earthly temptation could have induced these gentlemen to leave such extremely fascinating and utterly irresistible little ladies. The language is really good here. She has all the illustrated papers. Maybe it's not quite as beautiful as, some of the scenes in other operas. I'll just give it a 7, but I do think the language is very nice here, and it's very, very funny. Character. Yeah, what I love about this scene is how Donnell kind of finally gets them to, shut up. Because he finally reveals to them, what the issue is. And then he gets to, deliver this really sick burn. And he goes and I think it would be best now for you two to consider yourselves as single, young ladies. Good evening. And it's great. I absolutely love that. And then you really get to see them just trying to puzzle over it madly. Oh my goodness, I'm Mount Vesuvius, here we are in arithmetic. Oh, and of course the bit at the start. Their beautiful daughter Casilda. I say their beautiful daughter Casilda. We heard you. It's just so ridiculous. I think you're a very incomprehensible old gentleman. How on earth do you play this line of Donnell's? Their wives. Oh dear, this is very unfortunate. Oh dear, this complicates matters. Dear, dear, what'll Her Majesty say? Because that has to be kind of sarcastic, because obviously he already knows about the wives. Unless you're playing it like he forgets. So the thing is, this line is one of those rare instances of a line where I don't think Gilbert did intend for the character to really believe in what he was saying. So either he's pretending, oh dear, oh no, oh this complicates matters, or it's oh, what a shame. Finally you guys are actually stopping interrupting me and teasing me, and you're actually listening to me now, aren't you? Yeah, finally. So whichever way you play it, I love that line on Donnell's, it's so good. One of you, only one. The other, whichever it is an unintentional bigamist. So yeah, I think where Gondoliers kind of loses, and the fact that it's not got this really kind of solid high stakes plot, it is really made up for in just charm and comedy and just sweetness. And I do think these characters are really nice and fun. I'm going to give it an 8 for character again. Narrative importance. I think this is actually one scene that really does seem to tie together several elements of the plot. So I'm actually going to give this a 9. I think it does that really well, actually. And that actually gives it the highest mark so far. So this one gets a 42. So I think this one's probably going to win, to be honest. So yeah, let's get cracking with the next one and see if anything will beat it, which I think is unlikely. Be good enough to inform His Majesty that His Grace the Duke of Plathatoro Limited has arrived and demands an audience. And now, my child, prepare to receive the husband to whom you were united under such interesting and romantic circumstances.
But which is it? There are 2 of them.
It is true that at present His Majesty is a double gentleman, but as soon as the circumstances of his marriage are ascertained, he will, ipso facto, boil down to a single gentleman, thus presenting a unique example of an individual who becomes a single man and a married man by the same operation. I have known instances in which the characteristics of both conditions existed concurrently in the same individual. Ah, he couldn't have been a Plathatoro. Couldn't he, though?
Well, whatever happens, I shall of course be a dutiful wife, but I can never love my husband.
I don't know. It's extraordinary what unprepossessing people one can love if one gives one's mind to it.
I loved your father.
My love, that remark is a little hard, I think. Rather cruel, perhaps. Somewhat uncalled for, I venture to believe.
It was very difficult, my dear, but I said to myself, that man is a duke, and I will love him. Several of my relations bet me I couldn't, but I did. Desperately.
So Gilbert's given his actors a very hard job here, because these three people, Casilda and the Duke and the Duchess, they haven't been seen in so long, like 90 minutes. Maybe not quite 90 minutes, but close to 90 minutes. And suddenly they have to remind the audience, like instantly, how fun they were before, and they are fun characters. But I think that takes quite a lot of work, and after we've kind of really got to know and fall in love with the quartet, and we've just had Contemplative Fashion, which is one of the best quartets in the canon, and Don Allen, how funny and great he is, I think it's a hard job for these people to come back in and be funny. And a lot of their jokes I'm finding are just like a bit too clever, because I'm not really understanding them so much. I've known instances where these two conditions have appeared in the same individual, like somebody being both a single and a married man. Like, is she implying that the Duke is married but he's behaving like he's single? Like, is that what she's saying? Has he cheated on her or tried to cheat on her? I don't really get the joke, because it's not really spelled out for us, because then it's saying that she tamed him in the next song. So maybe she's talking about him earlier on and not at the moment. It's weird when people seem to both hate each other and love each other, and this is an example of that. But it's done so in a way that it isn't really quite clear what they're talking about, and this gets even more pronounced in the next scene. So I do think that the Duchess is a great character, purely for the song that she gets to sing, but I don't really follow the thread of exactly what the Duke and Duchess are talking about in this scene. And I do like the I loved your father. Oh, that's a little harsh, but he says it in 3 different ways. Is that funny? I think it is funny. It's starting to be funny in the same way that Grand Duke is funny, like in the way that these jokes are really like dragged out in a way that you think might not be funny, but if the characters really believe it, it kind of becomes funny. So, my love, that remark is a little hard, I think. Rather cruel, perhaps. Somewhat uncalled for, I venture to believe. So it's redundant. But it's kind of funny. It's the over long sentences are just kind of funny. But I do find the line really funny. I don't know, it's extraordinary what unprepossessing people one can love if one gives one's mind to it. If one gives one's mind to it. Oh, that's a good line. It's a funny line. But I don't find this scene laugh out loud funny. I'm going to give it a 13. I think there are some sweet moments that there's nothing like the kind of brilliance of the couple of scenes that came before it, honestly. Beauty of language. I do think that the Duke's lines actually are very beautiful. It is true that at present His Majesty is a double gentleman, but as soon as the circumstances of his marriage are ascertained, he will ipso facto bore down to a single gentleman, thus presenting a unique example of an individual who becomes a single man and a married man by the same operation. Like, it's quite nice. I'm going to give it a 7 again. I do quite like that. Character, they're trying their best. But still, I'm not really quite getting who these people are, apart from just being like, oh, they're kind of vaguely zany, interesting, rich people. But we've already got that. And like, who are they? I don't really know. I don't know. And does this have anything to do with the narrative? There is a little bit of narrative where we're reminded that Casilda's going to marry them, but we've already just been told that in the last scene. But yeah, fair enough. So I'm going to give that a 6 for narrative. I think that we learn enough that it makes it kind of somewhat important. 32, this scene gets overall. Yes.
My only hope is that when my husband sees what a shady family he is married into, he'll repudiate the contract altogether.
Shady? A nobleman, shady, who can look back upon 95 quarterings? It is not every nobleman who has 95 quarters in arrear. I mean, who can look back on 95 of them. And this, just as I have been floated at a premium. Oh, fie! Your Majesty is surely unaware that directly Your Majesty's father came before the public, he was applied for over and over again. My dear, Her Majesty's father was in the habit of being applied for over and over again, and very urgently applied for too, long before he was registered under the Limited Liability Act.
You see, again, this scene seems more just like Gilbert needing an excuse to laugh at something current than actually something that's anything to do with the plot of the Gondoliers. His Majesty was applied for over and over again. Like, I get that that's a reference to kind of buying stocks of a limited company, I guess. But then when it says, oh no, but His Majesty was applied for over and over again long before he became like a public company. It's like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Are you saying people would like wanting to work with him? I don't know what that means. So I don't really get the joke, and I think a lot of the jokes mean that you need to know the language involved in like setting up and running a public company, which I just don't. I just don't really understand that language. That was also kind of a problem I had with the scene earlier on as well. It's just not something I really get. I'm going to give it a 5 for beauty poetry. I think I do quite like the applied for over and over again long before he became, etc. That's quite a nice, aesthetically pleasing line. But honestly, I'm going to give this an 8 for comedy. It's so specific to like a certain topic and nothing to do with the narrative. And with that in mind, I'm also going to give this a 2 for narrative importance. I just don't find it in the least bit relevant to anything that's going on. Character? Is it relating to their characters? I mean, yeah, I guess, but the song is better than the dialogue. I'll give it a generous 5 for character, and that gets it the grand score of 20 out of 50.
Ah, their majesties, your majesty. The Duke of Plathatoro, I believe. The same. Allow me to present the young lady one of us married.
Gentlemen, I am the most obedient servant of one of you. Oh, Louis!
I am now about to address myself to the gentleman whom my daughter married. The other may allow his attention to wander if he likes, for what I am about to say does not concern him. Sir, you will find in this young lady a combination of excellences which you would search for in vain in any young lady who had not the good fortune to be my daughter. There is some little doubt as to which of you is the gentleman I am addressing, and which is the gentleman who is allowing his attention to wander. But when that doubt is solved, I shall say, still addressing the attentive gentleman, take her, and may she make you happier than her mother has made me.
Sir!
If possible. And now there is a little matter to which I think I am entitled to take exception. I come here in state with her Grace the Duchess and her Majesty my daughter. And what do I find? Do I find, for instance, a guard of honour to receive me? No.
No.
The town illuminated? No.
No.
Refreshment provided? No.
No.
A royal salute fired? No.
No.
Triumphal arches erected? No.
No.
The bells set ringing?
No.
Yes. 1. The visitors. And I rang it myself. It is not enough. It is not enough. Upon my honour, I'm very sorry, but you see, I was brought up in a gondola, and my ideas of politeness are confined to taking off my cap to my passengers when they tip me.
That's all very well in its way, but it is not enough.
I'll take off anything else in reason. But a royal salute to my daughter, it costs so little.
Papa, I don't want a salute.
My dear sir, as soon as we know which of us is entitled to take that liberty, she shall have as many salutes as she likes.
As for the guards of honour and triumphal arches, you don't know our people. They wouldn't stand for it.
They are very offhand with us. Very offhand indeed.
Oh, but you mustn't allow that.
You must keep them in proper discipline. You must impress your court with your importance. You want deportment. Carriage. We've got a carriage. Manner. Dignity. There must be a good deal of this sort of thing. And a little of this sort of thing. And possibly just a soupçon of this sort of thing. And so on. Oh, it's very useful and most effective. Just attend to me. You are king. I am a subject. Very good.
And this scene I really like, and I think it's really great. I think I was particularly struck by how good the poetry is in this scene. I'm actually going to give it a 9 for that. I think this is one of the most beautifully written scenes in the opera. Especially the Duke's lines, who had not the good fortune of being my daughter. That speech is just so lovely. I'm still addressing the attentive gentleman. That's a funny joke. I hope you like the addition of my cats. I thought that cats, being the noble, dignified animals that they are, would provide some good inspiration for ways in which we can act in a stately manner. And I think Kitty falling out of her cat tree is just one of the most elegant things I think I've seen a creature do. So that is the reason I included them. It wasn't just me being silly, I was making a very important point there. There is actually a really funny joke that I'm going to try and find from one of my productions of the Gondoliers, where there's several no, yes, no, going back and forth about the visitor's bell. I'm going to put that in here.
The bell stopped ringing?
No.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes.
That is a way that can go, and that is so funny. I think the doily cart did it before they shut down. And I think that what is good about this is that it ties together all the stuff from the beginning of the act, and kind of, even though it never gets resolved because Marco and Giuseppe don't continue being king, what's good is that it shows them, oh no, you mustn't stand for them behaving like that. You know, you shouldn't let people treat you like that. And I would like to think, I don't think this is what is happening, but I'd like to think that this is about more than just being king. This is also just, no, if you carry yourself in a certain way, people will respect you. Like, if you act confident and act sure of yourself, then people will respect you more. I'm going through that with my cats actually at the moment. Like, one of my cats is really scared of the new cat, and she keeps like running away. Because of that, he chases her. He doesn't chase the other two, he just chases her because she's scared. But I like this because she is acting like a victim. But if she were to, so that's why we're trying to play with her to give her more confidence, to remind her that she's like a fierce, noble hunter. So we're doing that more and more and giving her more confidence, and we're noticing we're getting fewer kind of negative interactions now. But you know, I'd like to think the Duke was not just saying, you know, for the one of you that's king. I'd like for him to say, no, don't let people treat you that way. I know he's not doing that. I just think that's cool, and that should be what he's saying. So many funny things in this scene. Just love all the no's in response. I love the not dressing the attentive gentleman stuff. There's so much chance for business in this scene, and the Duke is so funny in this scene. He's really great. And with that in mind, I'm going to give this really quite a high mark for character. I'm going to give this a 9 for character, because I think the Duke is just so good in it. Comedy, I don't think it's maybe quite as funny as some of the other scenes we've been discussing, but I'm going to give it like a 16 out of 20. I do think it is lovely. I'll take anything else off in reason. Again, I've seen people go, I'll take anything else off in reason, like saying it knowingly. He can do that, but I think it's funnier for him not to even realise what he's saying. That's probably a funnier thing. People wouldn't stand for it. They're so sweet, Marco and Giuseppe. They're just really, really lovely. Maybe this doesn't get quite a 16. I'll give it a 15. I think that, because there are some things, I think I actually cut out a bit of this when I did it in Heaver. I cut out the royal salute stuff. Oh, I don't want a salute. I probably wouldn't do that again, because I hadn't realised the importance of Marco and Giuseppe saying, oh no, it's our people, they don't stand for it. And actually, I think that's quite important for the Duke to come in there and say no. So anyone who buys my DVD of the Gondoliers in Heaver, yeah, I didn't really understand the importance of that, and I made that cut, which I shouldn't have made, because, you know, we're all capable of making mistakes, and that was a mistake that I made, and apologies for that. It's still on the festival DVD. If you buy it from, if you stream it on GS Opera TV or buy it from the festival's website, the full scene is there then. I was trying to cut down time in Heaver because we were under time constraints, and that was a bit I didn't think was important, but I actually think it is quite important, so I would not make that mistake again. Narrative importance. Nothing's really progressing, but nothing has progressed since the cachucha, since they said, oh, we can't do anything until nurse arrives, so let's dance. But at least we're getting characters meeting, and I appreciate that is, you know, something that is happening. They've met Casilda now. You know, gentlemen, I am the most obedient servant of one of you. Oh, Lewis, because she sees how inept they are, and how intelligent and wonderful and romantic Lewis is, and just how simple these two are. And oh, poor Casilda, but also poor Marco Giuseppe. Like, can you imagine? She just went, oh, Lewis, just in front of them, and they're like, what? Who's Lewis? But no, it's meant to be an aside. But I'll give that a 7 for narrative importance. I do think that's quite a decent scene, and that gets a mark of 40. So I have to decide if that is funnier than the scene with Marco and Giuseppe Donnell. I think that that one has to be funnier. The whole leapfrogging, I think that's a better scene. So I'm just going to go ahead and deduct a mark for I think I will deduct a mark for narrative importance, because even though we are harking back to things earlier, we're not really progressing. So I think a 6 probably is right. So that means there's no ties anymore. And then we move on to the final scene.
The old birds have gone away and left the young chickens together. That's called tact. It's very awkward. We really ought to tell her how we are situated. It's not fair to the girl. Then why don't you do it? I'd rather not. You. I don't know how to begin. Madam, that is, several of us. Gentlemen, I am bound to listen to you, but it is right to tell you that, not knowing I was married in infancy, I am over head and ears in love with somebody else. Our case exactly. We are over head and ears in love with somebody else. In point of fact, with our wives. Your wives? Then you are married. It's not our fault. We knew nothing about it. We are sisters in misfortune. My good girls, I don't blame you. Only before we go any further, we must really arrive at some satisfactory arrangement, or we shall get hopelessly complicated.
Okay, so there's nothing wrong with this scene. I think I went into detail about why I find this section a little bit unsatisfying in my Quintets Plus video, where I talk about my issues with the song that follows, which is that why aren't they discussing it then? They said they were going to discuss it, and yet they don't discuss it. They just talk about arithmetic again. And Casilda, she wouldn't fall for that, because Casilda isn't as stupid as they are. It's like, yeah, the contemplative fashion song is funny because they really think that's the issue, but Casilda wouldn't think that's the issue. Here's a case unprecedented. Oh no, what do we do? Well, the solution's easy. So, like, yeah, okay, let's say it's Giuseppe that's the king. So Casilda's married to Giuseppe. Tessa marries Luiz. And they all just live in the palace together. And it's like, hush, hush. You know? Just do that. Are we saying people didn't do that in those days? Of course they did. Come on. I do appreciate the narrative importance of this scene, but it's very rushed. Oh my goodness. Like, whoa, okay, suddenly everyone's met. They've admitted it. Oh, okay, that was... Really, like, there couldn't have been like a funnier way of drawing that out. I'll give that a 7 for narrative importance. I appreciate they've come together, but I think it happened in such an abrupt way. And yeah, they admitted they were married so readily, and she's like, oh, there's also someone I'm in love with. Oh, okay, well, that solved that issue like instantly. There was never any kind of jealousy there. You know, I'm not saying I wanted there to be a huge conflict, but it just sometimes something gets really like amped up, like the stakes of something, and like, oh, what's going to happen when these people meet? It's like, oh, they meet and it's all just resolved in like a second. And it's just a bit unsatisfying, really. Not resolved, but I mean, the tension's gone because there's no jealousy there. Beauty poetry, nothing particularly beautiful about this scene. I'll give it a 5. I've also given it a 10. No, I'm going to give it a 9 for comedy. I'm actually only going to give it a 6 for character. I don't really think this one is particularly characterful in any way. Like, what are we learning? Nothing. Are they still being their characters, I guess? Like, ever so slightly, but it doesn't deserve more than a 6 for character, I don't think. So that gives that scene a total mark of 27. So let us order these scenes. So in 13th place, we have the Duke and Duchess and Casilda scene before small titles and orders. In 12th place, we have the Quartet plus Casilda, which is the one we've just talked about. In 11th place, we have the Ducal party plus Donnell. Nothing really wrong with that scene, it just wasn't particularly interesting or funny. And then in 10th place, we have Marco and Giuseppe pre-Sparkling Eyes, and that's just because it's so short. It's actually a very lovely scene that's got some nice little bits in it. Then in 9th place, we have the Duke, Duchess and Casilda from Act 1. Quite a lot of nice things happen in that scene. Oh, no, not from Act 1. It is just the first of the 2 scenes, so it is actually still Act 2. But I think that scene's a bit more interesting. We learn a little bit more about the Duchess and the Duke and their relationship, but again, it's a bit narratively confusing. Number 8, we have the pre-cachucha scene. This is like delightfully deranged speech that Tessa gives, but it loses points for it being anti-narrative. Then in 7th place we have Marco and Giuseppe and the men at the start of Act 2, which I've realised is actually a very funny scene. It is shorter than the others and I don't think it has quite as many jokes, but it is, the concept of the whole scene is very funny and it's certainly a much more interesting scene than I'd previously given it credit for. Number 6 is the Luiz and Casilda love scene, which I do think is very sweet, and I don't think the jokes about quarter of an hour, 10 minutes are overly laboured. I think it can work really well to do the whole thing. Then in 5th place, we have the Duke, Duchess, Luiz and Casilda scene just after From the Sunny Spanish Shore. I think this is a great scene. I don't think this grinds the show to a halt at all, only in the sense that the opening was so sparkling that this is like a bit of a downer, but barely. I think this is such a good time. We learn a lot about these characters, well, just as much as we can learn about any character in the Gondoliers, but it is a really lovely start to the dialogue and it's got so many jokes in it, so many intriguing characters. All in all, I just think it's a really, really good, funny scene. In 4th place, it's the pre-Gavotte scene, which we just discussed, with Duke being especially funny and Marco and Giuseppe being really silly. There's so much scope for business here with like saying this sort of thing and this sort of thing. And you can even use live cats on stage if you want for that. I permit it. You can steal that idea from me. In 3rd place, we have Marco and Giuseppe and Don Al from Act 2. This is before there lived a king. This is the not even a Lord High Cook scene. Lovely. So, so good. In number 2, we have the Quartet plus Don Al in Act 1. This is where they learn about one of Marco and Giuseppe being a king. But then in 1st place, we have the Quartet plus Don Al in Act 2. So those two scenes came number 1 and number 2 for me. I was surprised as I previously thought the Quartet weren't terribly interesting, but actually, even if they aren't interesting as individuals, just as a whole, they are so, so funny. And I will not underestimate them again. Gondoliers is still not my favourite. I have not been won over by Will telling me, oh, the Gondoliers should be like right near the top. For me, it's still lacking in something that the others are, that most of the others are, in terms of this kind of lack of depth and lack of character. Because even I find Utopia Limited and Grand Duke, I just seem to invest more in the story and the characters than I do in the Gondoliers, despite them ostensibly having the same problem with being more of a way of linking musical numbers than actually a story in itself. This one I think probably is one of the weakest stories for me, maybe even the weakest story of them all. But I've made an effort to rank these dialogue scenes for you. I do think there is some good stuff in the dialogue, and certainly this is not the worst dialogue of all of them. We may be getting to that next time. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I know I told you at the start, but I'm telling you again, it's easy. Just click a button. Because I'm always getting more views than I am subscribers, so just do it. It doesn't hurt anyone, and it just makes me feel good. So please do that. Like the video, tell your friends. Auf Wiedersehen.